Christmas morning at my parents' house in suburban Minneapolis. I watched as my parents, Frank and Carol, ceremoniously handed my 28-year-old sister Sarah a silver house key tied with red ribbon. "Congratulations, honey. We bought you that beautiful colonial on Elm Street," my mother beamed. When I asked about the house, my father said dismissively, "Sarah needs stability for her future family. You'll understand someday, son." I sat quietly, holding a carefully wrapped envelope containing documents that would change everything. My parents had no idea what was coming. The house key dangled from Sarah's fingers like a golden ticket to a life I'd never be offered. I'm Burton, 32 years old, and I've spent my entire existence watching my parents hand my sister opportunities that somehow never found their way to me. As Sarah squealed with delight and my parents pulled out their phones to capture her joy, I sat in the corner armchair that had become my designated spot over 3 decades of family gatherings. My mind drifted to the pattern that had defined our relationship. When Sarah graduated high school with average grades, she received a brand new Honda Civic with a giant red bow. When I graduated as valedictorian 2 years later, I got a card with $50 inside and a pat on the back. Sarah's college tuition at the state university was paid in full by our parents, while I worked 2 jobs and took out student loans to afford my accounting degree at the same school. Her wedding 3 years ago cost them $30,000 for a fairy tale ceremony at the country club, while I wasn't even asked to be in the wedding party. I'd built a successful career as a certified public accountant here in Denver, managing the finances for several small businesses and maintaining a comfortable lifestyle in my 1-bedroom apartment downtown. I drove a reliable Toyota Camry that I'd paid off 2 years early, had a healthy emergency fund, and contributed regularly to my retirement account. By any reasonable measure, I was doing well for myself. Yet somehow, in my parents' eyes, I was the child who still needed to understand someday. The memory that kept gnawing at me happened 6 months ago during Thanksgiving. I'd gone upstairs to use the bathroom and noticed Sarah's childhood bedroom had been converted into a guest room. She'd moved out years ago, but some of her personal items remained. As I walked past her dresser, I noticed our grandmother Rose's ornate jewelry box sitting prominently on top. Grandma Rose had passed away 4 years ago, and I remembered her telling me that her jewelry box had secrets that would help me understand the family better when the time was right. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened the jewelry box and heard the familiar melody of Fur Elise playing as the tiny ballerina spun. The compartments held Sarah's costume jewelry and a few pieces from Grandma Rose's collection. But as I examined the box more closely, I noticed something strange. The bottom felt thicker than it should have been. I pressed on various spots until I heard a soft click. A hidden compartment slid open, revealing a small brass key attached to a safety deposit box tag from First National Bank. My heart raced as I studied the key. The safety deposit box number was etched clearly. 479. Attached was a small piece of paper in Grandma Rose's distinctive handwriting. "For my dear Burton, when you're ready to know the truth about your inheritance." Box location: downtown Minneapolis branch. I quickly closed the hidden compartment and returned the jewelry box to its place. The key now felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. Grandma Rose had always been closest to me among all the grandchildren. She'd taught me how to balance a checkbook when I was 12, encouraged my interest in mathematics and finance, and often told me I had an old soul that reminded her of her late husband, my grandfather Thomas. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the key and what truth about your inheritance could mean. Grandma Rose had lived modestly in the same small house for 50 years. She drove an old Buick until she was 85, shopped with coupons, and always seemed worried about money. What inheritance could she have been referring to? Over the next several weeks, I found excuses to visit my parents more frequently, hoping to learn more about Grandma Rose's estate. My parents had been executors of her will, and they'd mentioned that she'd left some money for both Sarah and me, but that it was being held in trust until we were financially mature enough to handle it responsibly. They'd never given me specific amounts or timelines. The pieces started falling into place when I overheard a phone conversation between my parents 3 weeks ago. I'd arrived early for Sunday dinner and let myself in through the garage. As I walked through the kitchen, I heard my mother on the phone in the living room. "Sarah's doing so well with the money Rose left her," Mom was saying. "The house down payment will be perfect for her future family. Burton just isn't ready for that kind of responsibility yet. You know how he is with money." I froze. Sarah had already received her inheritance? When? And what did you know how he is with money even mean? I'd never been financially irresponsible. If anything, I was more careful with money than anyone else in the family. Standing there in my parents' kitchen, holding a carefully wrapped envelope that contained 3 months of investigation results, I watched Sarah pose for pictures with her new house key. She had no idea that her joy was built on lies that stretched back 7 years. Neither did my parents realize that their decades of deception were about to crumble. The envelope in my lap contained copies of documents that would expose the most elaborate betrayal I could have imagined. But first, I needed to let this Christmas morning play out exactly as my parents had planned. Because when my father opened his gift, his smile wouldn't just vanish. His entire world would collapse. 3 days after finding the key, I drove to Minneapolis and walked into the First National Bank downtown branch during my lunch break. My hands shook slightly as I approached the customer service desk with the key, a copy of Grandma Rose's death certificate, and the probated will that my parents had filed 4 years ago. The bank representative, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, led me to the safety deposit box area. "We've been wondering when someone would come for box 479, she said. "The annual fee has been paid automatically from an account your grandmother set up, but we hadn't heard from the family." She inserted her master key alongside Grandma Rose's key, and the metal box slid out smoothly. Patricia left me alone in the small viewing room with the contents of my grandmother's final secret. The first item I pulled out was a sealed envelope marked, "For Burton, open first." Inside was a handwritten letter dated 3 months before Grandma Rose's death. "My dearest Burton," it began, "if you're reading this, it means you've found my hiding place and something has happened to me. I hope you're old enough now to understand what I need to tell you about your inheritance and your parents." I had to stop reading and take several deep breaths. My inheritance, my parents. What was she about to tell me? The letter continued. "When your grandfather Thomas died 10 years ago, he left me more money than I ever let anyone know about. Thomas was very careful with his investments, and over 40 years, they grew substantially. I want you to know that I am leaving my entire estate, $400,000, to be divided equally between you and Sarah. I've set up a trust with your parents as executors, with clear instructions that each of you should receive your share when you turn 25. $400,000, split equally. That meant $200,000 should have come to me when I turned 25 7 years ago." I kept reading with growing confusion and anger. "I've given your parents specific written instructions that this money should be used to help both of you start your adult lives responsibly. I trust them to follow my wishes and treat both my grandchildren fairly and equally." The letter was signed with her characteristic flourish, and below her signature was a note added in different ink. "Burton, I worry your parents don't always see your worth the way I do. You have always been responsible and thoughtful. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Love always, Grandma Rose." I set the letter aside and examined the other contents of the box. There was a copy of a handwritten will, dated 6 months before the typed version that had been probated. In this version, the instructions were crystal clear. "I leave my entire estate of $400,000 to be divided equally between my grandchildren, Sarah Elizabeth Morrison and Burton Thomas Morrison, with each receiving exactly $200,000 when they reach age 25. The box also contained bank statements from an account I'd never heard of, showing a balance of $412,000 at the time of her death. There were investment statements, documentation of municipal bonds, and records of certificates of deposit that had been carefully managed for decades. But the most shocking items were at the bottom of the box, copies of letters that Grandma Rose had written to both Sarah and me, meant to be delivered with our inheritances. Sarah's letter congratulated her on turning 25 and explained how the money should help her start her adult life. My letter, which should have been delivered when I turned 25 7 years ago, expressed similar sentiments and specifically mentioned that Grandma Rose was proud of my mathematical mind and responsible nature. Underneath these letters was a manila folder containing documents that made my blood run cold. There were copies of forms with my signature, supposedly declining my inheritance because I was not ready for the financial responsibility. The signature looked like mine, but I had no memory of ever seeing or signing these documents. I called in sick to work and spent the rest of the day at the bank, making copies of everything and trying to piece together what had happened. Patricia helped me access the payment records for the safety deposit box, which showed that the automatic payments were coming from the same trust account that held Grandma Rose's estate. "This is highly unusual," Patricia said as she reviewed the documents. "Typically, safety deposit boxes are inventoried immediately after death as part of the estate process. The fact that this box wasn't opened suggests the executors might not have known about it, or chose not to disclose it." That evening, I sat in my apartment with the copies spread across my dining table. The pattern was becoming clear. Sarah had received her inheritance when she turned 25, 3 years ago. She'd used that money for graduate school, her elaborate wedding, and now apparently for a house down payment. Meanwhile, my parents had forged documents indicating that I'd declined my inheritance, allowing them to keep my $200,000 in the trust account. But if my money was still sitting in that trust account, why hadn't I received it? And why were my parents continuing to pay the safety deposit box fees from estate funds if they thought the inheritance had been properly distributed? I needed to dig deeper. The next morning, I called a private investigator that I'd worked with on financial fraud cases for some of my business clients. Jake Morrison had retired from the Minneapolis Police Department after 25 years and specialized in financial crimes. I explained the situation and asked him to investigate my parents' handling of the estate. "This smells like elder abuse and inheritance fraud," Jake said after reviewing the documents I'd copied. "The forged signature alone is a felony, but I suspect there's more here than just your grandmother's money. Family financial fraud usually has multiple layers. Give me 2 weeks, and I'll show you the whole picture." While Jake conducted his investigation, I had to continue living normally. I went to work every day, attended my usual client meetings, and even had dinner with my parents the following Sunday. Sitting at their dining room table, listening to them discuss Sarah's excitement about her new house, felt surreal. They had no idea that I knew about the inheritance, or that a professional investigator was currently examining their financial activities. "Sarah's so responsible with money," my mother said as she served dessert. "We're so proud of how she's handled everything we've given her over the years. Some people are just naturally good with finances," my father added, not looking in my direction. "Others need more time to mature before they can handle real money." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the evidence in their faces right then and there, but Jake had advised me to stay quiet until his investigation was complete. "Family financial fraud cases require overwhelming evidence," he'd explained. "If you tip them off too early, they might destroy records or hide assets." So I smiled and nodded, and accepted their backhanded insults about my supposed financial immaturity. But inside, I was planning for the day when I would reveal everything I'd learned. That day was coming soon, and it would be devastating. 2 weeks later, Jake called me with results that exceeded my worst fears. "Burton," he said, his voice grim, "you need to sit down. What your parents have done goes way beyond your grandmother's inheritance. This is systematic financial fraud spanning over a decade." Jake's investigation revealed a level of deception that left me speechless. We met at a coffee shop near my office, and he spread out a thick folder of documents across our table. "Your parents haven't just stolen your inheritance," he began. "They've been systematically exploiting your financial identity since you graduated college." The first set of documents showed tax returns filed by my parents for the past 12 years. They'd been claiming me as a dependent well into my 20s, receiving thousands of dollars in tax credits and deductions that I knew nothing about. Even after I'd moved out and been completely financially independent, they'd continued listing me as living in their household and being supported by them. "The IRS has been sending your parents refund checks based on these false dependency claims," Jake explained. "We're talking about roughly $3,000 per year for the past 8 years. That's $24,000 in fraudulent refunds." But that was just the beginning. Jake showed me evidence of retirement accounts that had been opened in my name, with my social security number, but listing my parents as beneficiaries. The accounts were being funded with money from my grandmother's estate, but since they were in my name, my parents could claim they were helping me save for retirement while actually setting up accounts they would inherit. "This is sophisticated financial fraud," Jake said. "They've created the paper trail to make it look like they're financially supporting you and helping you build wealth, but they've structured everything so that they remain in control and will ultimately benefit from these accounts." The most Shocking discovery was a series of credit cards that had been opened in my name over the years. My parents had been using my social security number and personal information to obtain credit, but they'd been carefully managing the payments to maintain excellent credit scores. I pulled out my phone and checked my credit report for the first time in months. My score was 798. They're not idiots, Jake explained. They've been very careful not to damage your credit because that would alert you to what they're doing. But look at the statements. The credit card statements showed regular charges for travel, restaurants, home improvements, and luxury purchases. My parents had been living beyond their means for years, supplementing their lifestyle with credit obtained fraudulently in my name. The total across 4 different cards was nearly $60,000. But here's the really insidious part, Jake continued. They've been making payments on these cards using money from your grandmother's trust account. So they're using your inheritance money to pay off debts they accumulated by stealing your identity. I felt sick to my stomach. How is this even possible? Don't banks verify identity when opening accounts? They had all your personal information from when you were a minor, Jake explained. Social security number, date of birth, previous addresses. They probably intercepted and redirected mail when you first moved out. And since they've been filing taxes claiming you as a dependent, there's a paper trail suggesting they have legitimate authority to manage your finances. The most devastating discovery was buried deeper in the investigation. Jake had traced the business loan used to purchase Sarah's house. My parents had secured a $300,000 mortgage using my social security number as a co-signer. I was legally responsible for my sister's house payment, and I'd never even seen the paperwork. Burton, according to the bank records, "You're jointly liable for this mortgage," Jake said. "If Sarah defaults or your parents stop making payments, the bank will come after you for the full amount." I stared at the mortgage documents, seeing my forged signature on multiple pages. The handwriting was close enough to fool a bank employee who was processing dozens of loans, but seeing it now, I could tell it wasn't my actual signature. "There's more," Jake said, producing another folder. "Your parents own a printing business that they started 12 years ago. Morrison Family Printing has been quite successful, but according to the incorporation documents, you're listed as a 50% owner." This was news to me. I'd never invested in or been involved with my parents' business, but the documents clearly showed that my grandmother's inheritance money had been used as startup capital, with my portion being classified as my investment contribution in the business. "They've been generating significant profits," Jake explained, showing me business tax returns. "The company has averaged about $100,000 in annual profit over the past 8 years. As a 50% owner, you're entitled to $50,000 per year in distributions." I did the math quickly. That's $400,000 over 8 years. Plus interest and penalties for the improper withholding, Jake nodded. "But there's no record of you ever receiving any business distributions. The profits have been accumulated in business accounts or paid out to your parents as salary and bonuses." Jake pulled out his phone and showed me a series of emails he'd obtained through his law enforcement contacts. "Your parents have been planning to sell the business and retire to Florida. They've already accepted an offer for $1.2 million, with closing scheduled for January 15th. I felt my world spinning. They're planning to take everything and disappear? It gets worse. The emails show they've been discussing how to handle the Burton situation after the sale. They're worried that you might eventually discover the fraud, so they're planning to move out of state and minimize contact with you." Jake showed me an email from my father to my mother dated 3 weeks ago. "After we sell the business and move to Sarasota, we'll need to be careful about Burton. Sarah thinks he's getting suspicious about the inheritance. We should probably tell him there was less money than we originally thought, and that his share was already distributed. By the time he figures anything out, we'll be settled in Florida, and he won't be able to prove anything." Reading those words felt like being punched in the stomach. My own parents were actively planning to steal nearly $1 million from me and then flee to another state to avoid accountability. They'd been discussing my suspicious behavior and planning their cover story. "What are my options?" I asked Jake. "You could file criminal charges for identity theft, fraud, and embezzlement. The evidence is overwhelming. But criminal cases can take years, and there's no guarantee you'll recover your money quickly. Your other option is to take immediate civil action to freeze their assets and force a settlement." Jake outlined a strategy that would allow me to recover my stolen money while avoiding the uncertainty of a lengthy criminal trial. "We file civil suits for the inheritance fraud, business partnership fraud, and identity theft. We get court orders to freeze all their business and personal accounts. We notify the business buyer that the sale is under legal dispute, and we offer them a settlement that allows them to avoid prison in exchange for returning everything they've stolen. But I want them to face consequences for what they've done, I said. They will, Jake assured me. Financial fraud like this carries serious federal penalties. Even if they avoid prison through a settlement, they'll be required to make full restitution, pay penalties and interest, and likely face other consequences. Plus, the truth will come out to the extended family and their community. Sometimes public shame and financial consequences are more effective than prison time. I spent the next week working with Jake to build an airtight legal case. We documented every fraudulent transaction, every forged signature, every stolen dollar. The evidence filled 2 thick binders. As I prepared for Christmas morning at my parents' house, I carefully wrapped the legal documents in festive paper. Inside that envelope were criminal charges, civil lawsuits, court orders, and documentation that would end my parents' financial fraud forever. They thought they were giving Sarah the ultimate Christmas gift. They had no idea that I was about to give them a Christmas morning they would never forget. The week before Christmas, Jake's investigation took another shocking turn. He'd been digging deeper into Morrison Family Printing's business records when he discovered something that made the entire fraud even more elaborate and devastating. "Burton, you need to see this," Jake said during our final meeting before the holidays. He'd called me at 7 in the morning, asking me to meet him at his office immediately. "What I found changes everything about your parents' business and your legal position." Jake's office walls were covered with charts and timelines mapping out 12 years of financial fraud. He led me to a conference table where new documents were spread out. "Remember how I told you that your parents used your grandmother's inheritance as startup capital for their printing business?" Jake began. "I've now traced exactly how that money was used, and it's much worse than we initially thought. According to business formation documents, Morrison Family Printing was incorporated in October 2011. The initial capitalization was exactly $400,000, which corresponded precisely to the total amount of my grandmother's estate. My parents had used both my inheritance and Sarah's inheritance as startup capital. But the paperwork showed me as a 50% owner, and Sarah as having no ownership stake at all. Sarah's money was classified as a loan to the business," Jake explained. "She was supposed to be repaid with interest over 5 years. But look at these loan payment records." The documents showed that Sarah had indeed been repaid her $200,000 plus interest, which explained how she'd been able to afford graduate school, her wedding, and eventually the house down payment. Her inheritance had been returned to her, with the business profits covering the loan payments. "But your $200,000 was classified as an equity investment, making you a permanent business partner," Jake continued. "Your parents have been operating this business for 12 years using your money as capital, but they've never acknowledged your ownership or paid you a single dollar in distributions." The business tax returns told an incredible story of success. Morrison Family Printing had grown from a small startup to a thriving commercial printing operation with annual revenues exceeding $700,000. After expenses, the business had generated substantial profits every year. "Let's look at the accumulated profits that should have been distributed to you as a 50% owner," Jake said, pulling out a calculator. "Year 1, $22,000 profit, your share is $11,000. Year 2, $38,000 profit, your share is $19,000. By year 8, they were generating over $200,000 in annual profit." Jake had created a spreadsheet showing my cumulative share of business profits over 12 years. The total was staggering. $647,000 in undistributed profits that legally belonged to me as a 50% owner. Plus the original $200,000 they used as startup capital, you're owed $847,000 from the business alone, Jake said. "But that's before interest, penalties, and damages for the fraudulent withholding." But the most shocking discovery was what Jake found when he investigated the pending business sale. The buyer was a regional printing company looking to expand into the Minneapolis market. The purchase price was $1.2 million, with closing scheduled for January 15th. According to the sale agreement, the entire purchase price is supposed to go to your parents as the listed owners, Jake explained. But as a 50% partner, you're legally entitled to $600,000 of that sale price. Jake showed me emails between my parents and their real estate agent about retirement properties in Sarasota, Florida. They'd already put a deposit on a luxury condo and were planning to move immediately after the business sale closed. "Here's the most damning evidence," Jake said, showing me a printout of recent email exchanges. "Your parents have been discussing what they call the Burton problem with their attorney." The email chain revealed that my parents had consulted with a lawyer about potential liability if I ever discovered the business partnership. Their attorney had advised them that partnership fraud carried serious criminal penalties, and that I could potentially claim ownership of the entire business since my capital had been used to start it. My father's response was chilling. "Burton has always been naive about money. By the time he figures anything out, we'll be in Florida with cash in hand. He can't prove anything if we're not here to answer questions." My mother's reply was equally cold. "We've supported him for 32 years. If he wants to make a fuss about ancient history, he can deal with lawyers while we enjoy our retirement." Jake had also discovered that my parents had been planning this exit strategy for over 2 years. They'd been gradually liquidating other assets, transferring money to accounts I couldn't trace, and setting up their Florida retirement with military precision. "They never intended for you to discover any of this," Jake said. "The business sale was supposed to be their final score before disappearing to Florida. If you hadn't found that safety deposit box key, they would have succeeded." The evidence was overwhelming. My parents had committed multiple felonies: inheritance fraud, identity theft, business partnership fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. The total amount they'd stolen from me exceeded $1 million when including the accumulated business profits and the pending sale proceeds. "What's our strongest legal position?" I asked Jake. "The business partnership fraud is actually more serious than the inheritance theft," he explained. "Stealing from a business partner is a federal crime with severe penalties. And since they've been filing false tax returns for the business, not reporting your partnership interest, they've also committed tax fraud." Jake outlined the legal strategy we'd use. First, we'd file emergency motions to freeze all business assets and halt the pending sale. Then we'd file both criminal charges and civil lawsuits, demanding full restitution plus punitive damages. Finally, we'd notify the business buyer, their real estate agent, and their Florida bank about the pending legal action. "The key is moving fast," Jake said. "Once they realize they've been caught, they might try to accelerate the business sale or hide money offshore. We need to strike before they can react." I spent Christmas Eve finalizing the legal documents. The envelope I planned to give my father contained more than just evidence of financial fraud. It contained proof that their entire retirement plan was built on stolen money, and that their attempt to flee to Florida would be stopped by federal law enforcement. As I wrapped the envelope in festive Christmas paper, I reflected on the irony. My parents thought they were so clever, manipulating family relationships and financial documents to steal nearly $1 million from their own son. They'd spent 12 years building a business with my money, generating profits they never shared, and planning a luxurious retirement funded by theft. But their greatest mistake was underestimating me. They saw me as the naive, financially immature child who would never figure out what they'd done. They had no idea that their accountant's son had the skills and connections to uncover the truth, or that their victim had the determination to seek justice. Tomorrow morning, when my father opened his Christmas present, he'd discover that his criminal enterprise was over, his assets were frozen, and his retirement dreams were destroyed. And for the first time in my life, my parents would finally understand that I was much more capable than they'd ever given me credit for. Christmas morning arrived with fresh snow covering the Minneapolis suburbs. I drove to my parents' house carrying 2 items: the carefully wrapped envelope containing legal documents that would destroy their lives, and a sense of calm determination I'd never experienced before. Sarah's car was already in the driveway when I arrived. She met me at the door with unusual enthusiasm, practically bouncing with excitement about her house key gift. "Burton, can you believe Mom and Dad bought me a house? I'm still in shock." "I'm sure you are," I said, knowing that her shock was nothing compared to what was coming. My parents greeted me with their typical lukewarm affection. Dad shook my hand firmly, as if we were business associates rather than family. Mom gave me a brief hug and immediately started bustling around the kitchen, preparing the elaborate Christmas brunch she'd been making for 30 years. "Burton, help me understand something," my father said as we gathered in the living room. "You're 32 years old, you have a decent job, but you're still renting an apartment downtown. When are you planning to buy a house and start building some real wealth? The irony was suffocating. My father was lecturing me about building wealth while sitting in a house that had been renovated using money stolen from my inheritance. The family business that had paid for their comfortable lifestyle was built with capital they'd embezzled from me. I've been focused on other investments, I said carefully. Sometimes the best opportunities aren't obvious to everyone else. After brunch, we gathered around the Christmas tree for gift exchange. Sarah went first, squealing with delight as she unwrapped the house key. My parents had prepared an elaborate presentation, complete with photos of the colonial house and a folder containing all the closing documents. "This house represents everything we've worked for as a family," my mother said, tears in her eyes. "Sarah deserves this stability as she starts thinking about her own family." "What about Burton?" Sarah asked, looking genuinely puzzled. "Are you planning something similar for him?" My parents exchanged a meaningful look. "Burton's situation is different," my father said diplomatically. "He needs to demonstrate more financial maturity before he's ready for this kind of responsibility." The condescension in his voice was infuriating, but I maintained my composure. "Actually, I think I've been more financially responsible than anyone realizes. But we'll get to that in a moment." I handed my father his gift. "This is something special I've been working on for months. It contains information that I think will really surprise the whole family." My father accepted the wrapped envelope with curiosity. "Information? That's an unusual Christmas gift, Burton. Trust me, Dad. This is the most important gift our family has ever exchanged." He tore open the wrapping paper and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Inside were copies of all the legal documents Jake and I had prepared. Criminal charges filed with the Minneapolis Police Department and the FBI, civil lawsuits demanding full restitution, court orders freezing business assets, and a complete investigation report documenting 12 years of financial fraud. My father's face went white as he read the first page. "What is this?" "Those are criminal charges for inheritance fraud, identity theft, business partnership fraud, and conspiracy," I said calmly. "Keep reading. There's a lot more." My mother rushed to his side and began reading over his shoulder. Her face showed the same progression of emotions: confusion, shock, panic, and finally anger. "Burton, what kind of sick joke is this?" she demanded. "It's not a joke, Mom. I know about Grandma Rose's inheritance. I know about the business partnership you created using my money without my knowledge. I know about the credit cards, the false tax returns, the forged signatures. I know everything." Sarah looked completely confused. "What's he talking about? What inheritance? What business partnership?" I pulled out copies of the documents I'd found in the safety deposit box. "Sarah, did you know that Grandma Rose left us equal inheritances of $200,000 each? Did you know that I never received my share?" Sarah's face went pale. "That's not possible. Mom and Dad told me that Burton declined his inheritance because he wasn't ready for the responsibility." "I never declined anything," I said, showing her the forged documents. "They kept my money and used it to start their business, making me a partner without my knowledge. For 12 years, they've been stealing profits that belonged to me." My father finally found his voice. "Burton, you're obviously confused about some complex financial arrangements. Let's sit down and discuss this rationally." "There's nothing to discuss, Dad. I've spent 3 months building an airtight legal case with a professional investigator. The FBI will be contacting you next week about federal charges. Your business assets have been frozen, and the pending sale to Regional Printing has been halted pending litigation." The room fell completely silent. My parents stared at me, as if I'd transformed into a completely different person. Their carefully constructed facade of parental authority was crumbling in real time. "You can't possibly understand the complexities of managing family finances," my mother said desperately. "We've always done what's best for both you and Sarah. What's best for us?" I laughed bitterly. "You stole nearly $1 million from me over 12 years. You used my identity to obtain credit. You made me legally responsible for Sarah's mortgage without my knowledge. You were planning to sell the business and move to Florida with money that belongs to me." Sarah was reading through the documents with growing horror. "Burton, this says that I've been receiving money that was supposed to be yours. The house, my wedding, graduate school that was your inheritance? Part of it was," I confirmed. "But you're not responsible for this, Sarah. You were told that I had declined my inheritance. You had no way of knowing that our parents were lying." My father's shock was transforming into anger. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? By destroying your own family with legal action? You destroyed this family when you decided to steal from your own children, I replied. I'm simply seeking justice. My mother was crying now. Burton, we love you. We've always provided for you. How can you betray us like this? How can I betray you? The question was so absurd I almost laughed. You've been systematically stealing from me for over a decade. You've been planning to disappear to Florida with nearly $1 million of my money. And you're asking how I can betray you? I pulled out my phone and showed them emails Jake had obtained. These are your own words, discussing the Burton problem and how to avoid accountability after you steal my business sale proceeds. Reading their own cold, calculating words seemed to break something in both my parents. The elaborate justifications and rationalizations they'd been building for years suddenly seemed pathetic and transparent. What do you want from us? My father asked quietly. I want everything you've stolen returned, with interest and penalties. I want public acknowledgement of what you've done, and I want you to understand that your actions have consequences. But before my parents could respond, Sarah spoke up with a revelation that would change everything. Sarah set down the legal documents with trembling hands and looked directly at our parents with an expression I'd never seen before. The confusion on her face had transformed into something much more intense: betrayal, anger, and what looked like years of suppressed guilt. I need to tell Burton something, she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. Something I should have told him 7 years ago. My parents' faces showed immediate panic. Sarah, you don't need to, my mother began. Yes, I do, Sarah interrupted firmly. Burton, I've known about your inheritance since I turned 25. Our parents didn't just tell me that you'd declined it. They made me promise never to mention it to you. The room went completely silent, except for the sound of my mother's shocked gasp. Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. When I turned 25, Mom and Dad called me to their house for a special financial discussion. They showed me Grandma Rose's will and explained that we'd each inherited $200,000. But they told me that you had already been informed about your inheritance and had decided you weren't ready for it. Sarah pulled out her phone and began scrolling through old messages. They said you'd asked them to give your share to me instead because you wanted to focus on building your career without the distraction of managing a large inheritance. That's impossible, I said. I never had any such conversation with them. I know that now, Sarah said, showing me text messages from 3 years ago. But when I questioned whether it was fair for me to receive both inheritances, look at how they responded. The text messages were from my mother. Sarah, we've discussed this extensively with Burton. He specifically requested that his inheritance go to you because he knows you're more mature and responsible with money. Don't make this difficult by questioning his decision. Another message from my father read, Your brother has always been impulsive with finances. He asked us to give you his inheritance because he trusts your judgment more than his own. Please respect his wishes and don't bring this up with him. They convinced me that it was your idea, Sarah continued, scrolling through more messages. And when I said I wanted to talk to you about it directly, they became very firm about keeping it secret. Sarah showed me a particularly manipulative message from my mother. Burton specifically asked us not to tell him when you receive the money because he doesn't want to feel guilty about his decision. If you mention the inheritance to him, you'll be violating his trust and potentially damaging his self-esteem. I stared at these messages, realizing how sophisticated my parents' manipulation had been. They'd convinced Sarah that I had voluntarily given up my inheritance and that discussing it with me would actually be harmful and disrespectful. But that's not the worst part, Sarah continued. Over the past 3 years, I've tried several times to bring up the inheritance indirectly, just to gauge your feelings about it. Every time I did, our parents shut down the conversation immediately. Sarah showed me more recent text messages. 6 months ago, she'd texted our mother. I feel guilty about the inheritance situation. Burton works so hard and lives so modestly. Are we sure he really wanted to give up his share? Our mother's response was swift and harsh. Sarah, we've been over this. Burton made his decision. If you bring this up with him now, you'll be violating the family trust and potentially destroying his relationship with us. Some things are better left alone. They threatened to cut me off completely if I told you the truth, Sarah said, tears flowing freely now. They said that if I couldn't respect Burton's decision and the family's privacy, then maybe I wasn't mature enough to handle my own inheritance. The manipulation was breathtaking in its sophistication. My parents had created an elaborate lie that painted me as financially irresponsible and self-aware enough to give away my own inheritance. They'd convinced Sarah that my secrecy was protecting me from embarrassment, and that revealing the truth would be cruel and destructive. But I've been carrying this guilt for 3 years, Sarah continued. Every time our parents criticized your financial decisions or suggested you weren't ready for major responsibilities, I wanted to scream. I knew they were being unfair, but I thought I was honoring your wishes by staying quiet. Sarah turned to face our parents directly. You didn't just steal from Burton, you manipulated me into being an accomplice. You made me feel guilty for receiving money that belonged to him, and then you used that guilt to control me. Our father tried to maintain his composure. Sarah, you're misunderstanding the complexity of the situation. We were trying to protect both of you. Stop lying! Sarah shouted, surprising everyone in the room. I just heard Burton explain that he never declined his inheritance. He never even knew about it. You made me believe I was respecting his decision when you were actually covering up your theft. Sarah stood up and walked to her purse. She pulled out a checkbook and began writing. Burton, I'm writing you a check for $250,000. That's my entire inheritance plus the appreciation from investments. I don't want money that was stolen from you. Sarah, you don't have to, I began. Yes, I do, she said firmly. I used that money for graduate school, my wedding, and the house down payment. I benefited from theft, even if I didn't know it was theft. I need to make this right. Our parents looked horrified. Sarah, you're overreacting, our mother pleaded. We can work this out as a family without involving lawyers and dramatic gestures. No, we can't, Sarah replied. You've been lying to both of us for years. You stole Burton's inheritance and then manipulated me into thinking it was his idea. You made me an unwitting accomplice to fraud. Sarah handed me the check and then turned back to our parents. And there's something else Burton needs to know. The house you bought me? I never asked for it. You called me 2 weeks ago and said you'd already purchased it as a surprise Christmas gift. I told you it was too expensive and that I couldn't afford the property taxes and maintenance. But you said not to worry because the family trust would cover all the ongoing expenses. This was news to me. What family trust? Apparently there isn't one, Sarah said bitterly. Based on what I'm reading in these legal documents, our parents plan to use Burton's stolen business profits to pay for my house expenses indefinitely. The scope of my parents' fraud was even larger than I'd realized. They hadn't just stolen my inheritance and business profits. They'd planned to use that stolen money to create ongoing financial obligations that would have extended the theft for decades. Sarah, I need you to know something important, I said. The mortgage for your house was obtained using my identity as a co-signer. I'm legally responsible for the payments. Sarah's face went white. You mean if I can't afford the payments, the bank will come after you? Exactly. Our parents made me liable for a $300,000 mortgage without my knowledge or consent. Sarah immediately pulled out her phone. I'm calling the bank right now. I'm going to explain the fraud and see about getting your name removed from the mortgage. Our parents watched helplessly as their carefully constructed manipulation unraveled completely. Their plan had required Sarah's unwitting cooperation and my continued ignorance. Now that we both knew the truth, their scheme was collapsing. What happens now? Our mother asked quietly. Now you face the consequences of 12 years of financial fraud, I replied. You can either agree to my settlement offer and make full restitution, or you can face federal criminal charges and potentially spend years in prison. What's your settlement offer? Our father asked. I pulled out the final document from my envelope. Full restitution of $847,000 from the business profits, plus $200,000 from the original inheritance, plus penalties and interest. Total settlement amount: $1.2 million. You'll also publicly acknowledge the fraud to our extended family and submit to financial monitoring to ensure compliance. That's everything from the business sale, my mother whispered. That's correct. Every penny you plan to steal is going back to its rightful owner. You can keep your house and your retirement accounts, but the money you stole from me is being returned. Sarah looked at our parents with disgust. You were going to move to Florida and live in luxury using money you stole from your own son. How could you look at yourselves in the mirror? For the first time in the entire confrontation, our parents had no answer. The elaborate justifications and rationalizations they'd been building for years had completely collapsed. They were forced to confront the reality of what they'd done, committed serious crimes against their own children, and planned to escape accountability by fleeing to another state. The truth was finally out, and justice was about to be served. The week after Christmas transformed everything. My parents, faced with overwhelming evidence of their crimes and the prospect of federal prison time, agreed to my settlement offer. Their attorney advised them that fighting the charges would be futile and expensive, with little chance of success. On January 2nd, we met at the law offices of Peterson, Williams, and Associates for the formal settlement conference. Jake Morrison was there as my advocate, along with 2 FBI agents who had been investigating the case. My parents brought their criminal defense attorney, a stern-faced woman named Patricia Collins, who had clearly explained the gravity of their situation. My clients are prepared to make full restitution and accept responsibility for their actions, Patricia announced. In exchange, we're requesting that federal criminal charges be reduced to misdemeanors with probation rather than prison time. The FBI agent, Special Agent Jennifer Walsh, reviewed the proposed settlement agreement. Given the amount of money involved and the sophisticated nature of the fraud, this is an unusually lenient offer from the victim. Mr. Morrison could pursue federal felony charges that carry sentences of 10 to 20 years. I looked across the table at my parents. They appeared to have aged 5 years in the past week. The confident, condescending people who had lectured me about financial responsibility just days ago were now broken and ashamed. I want justice, not revenge, I said. Full financial restitution is more important to me than seeing them in prison. But there are conditions beyond the money. My settlement demands were comprehensive. First, my parents had to transfer ownership of Morrison Family Printing to me immediately, along with all business assets and the pending sale proceeds. Second, they had to attend court-ordered financial counseling and submit to 5 years of financial monitoring. Third, they had to write letters to our extended family, explaining their fraud and apologizing for their actions. And most importantly, I continued, they have to acknowledge publicly that I was never financially irresponsible or immature. The narrative they created to justify their theft ends today. The settlement was finalized within 2 hours. I walked out of that conference room as the sole owner of a successful printing business worth $1.2 million, with an additional $200,000 in recovered inheritance funds, plus interest and penalties, bringing the total to nearly $1.5 million. But the financial recovery was only part of the story. The emotional healing took much longer. Sarah and I began having weekly dinners to rebuild our relationship. She insisted on returning her entire inheritance, even though I tried to convince her that she'd received her money legitimately. I can't enjoy any of this knowing it came from you, she said. Let's start over with both of us on equal footing. We decided that Sarah would keep the house, but I would formally remove my name from the mortgage by providing a down payment that would allow her to refinance in her own name. She could afford the payments with her teaching salary, and I felt good knowing that she had the stability our parents had promised her, just through honest means this time. The business sale proceeded as planned, but with me as the seller rather than my parents. I used half the proceeds to start my own accounting firm, Burton Morrison CPA Services, specializing in elder financial abuse and family financial fraud cases. The irony wasn't lost on me that my parents' crimes had given me both the capital and the expertise to help other families facing similar situations. Within 6 months, my firm had helped 12 families recover stolen inheritances, exposed 3 cases of business partnership fraud, and assisted law enforcement with prosecuting financial elder abuse. The work was deeply satisfying because I understood the emotional devastation that financial betrayal by family members could cause. I also began speaking at community centers and senior groups about financial fraud prevention. Family financial abuse is more common than most people realize, I would tell audiences. The people who are closest to us often have the easiest access to our financial information and the greatest ability to exploit our trust. My relationship with my parents remained complicated. They completed their court-ordered counseling and made all required payments on schedule. They moved to a modest apartment rather than the luxury Florida condo they'd planned, and my father took a part-time job to supplement their reduced retirement income. Gradually, Tentatively, we began rebuilding some kind of relationship. It took nearly a year before we could have a conversation that didn't revolve around the fraud, and it took even longer before I could trust them with any personal information about my life. "I know we can never undo what we did," my mother said during one of our awkward monthly dinners. "But I want you to know that we realize how wrong we were about your financial abilities. You've built something incredible with the business, and you're helping so many families. We're proud of you." It was the first time in my adult life that my parents had acknowledged my capabilities without reservations or conditions. The validation felt good, but I'd learned not to depend on their approval for my sense of self-worth. Sarah and I grew closer than we'd ever been. She became my strongest supporter and biggest advocate, often telling people about how I'd uncovered the fraud and built a successful business from the recovery. "My brother is the smartest, most determined person I know," she would say. Our parents really underestimated him. 2 years after that devastating Christmas morning, I was invited to speak at a national conference on financial fraud prevention. As I stood on the stage looking out at an audience of law enforcement officers, social workers, and financial professionals, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed. I thought about Grandma Rose and the hidden key she'd left me. She'd known that someday I would need to understand the truth about your inheritance and your parents. She'd given me the tools to uncover decades of deception and fight for justice. Most importantly, I'd learned that real family love isn't about financial gifts or material support. It's about honesty, fairness, and treating each other with respect and dignity. My parents had spent 12 years proving that they didn't consider me worthy of honest treatment. But in fighting back and demanding justice, I'd proven my own worth to myself. The greatest gift I received at Christmas wasn't the money I recovered or the business I inherited. It was the knowledge that I had the strength and intelligence to stand up for myself, even against the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was taking advantage of you financially? How did you handle the situation, and what did you learn about standing up for yourself? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more stories about overcoming family betrayal and finding justice. And if you know someone who might benefit from hearing this story, please share it with them. Sometimes we all need to be reminded that we're stronger and more capable than others might think. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that you always deserve to be treated with honesty and respect, especially by the people who claim to love you. Your worth isn't determined by other people's opinions of your abilities. It's determined by your actions and your courage to fight for what's right.